What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we're going to be discussing the major similarities and differences between the Ford F-150 Lightning and the Chevy Silverado EV. Okay, now we all knew it was coming, an electric Silverado. I mean, the writing was on the wall. You had the Rivian R1T, which is heading into customers' hands as we speak. You've got the Ford F-150 Lightning, which was released back in May of 2021 and is going to start hitting dealer lots in spring of this year. And you have the Cybertruck, which is going to start production in the year 2030. But obviously, one of the largest truck manufacturers in the world, Chevy, had to release an electric competitor to the Ford Lightning and to the Rivian R1T. Well, today, January 5th, 2021, GM made the major announcement that they're releasing a Chevy Silverado EV. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss the similarities and differences with its counterpart, the F-150 Lightning. Now, keep in mind, both of the vehicles are essentially prototypes as we speak. They're definitely pre-production models, and a few things can change when they hit production, especially for the Silverado, since that is over a year away from starting production. Whereas the F-150 Lightning is probably minor tweaks at this point, since it's going into production sometime in the spring or summer of this year. But I figured it would be helpful with the information we currently have to compare the two vehicles so that you might know which one is better to buy. I also wanted to talk about two frustrations that I noticed with today's big reveal, but I think I'm going to save that for a different video because I'm worried this one is going to be too long as it is, and I kind of want to dedicate a separate video to the two things that I noticed that would probably outrage a lot of the car community. One specifically that kind of just really gets on car buyers' nerves. But I will save that for the next video, so stay tuned for that. And well, while we're at it, if you're new to the channel, my name is Armand, and I am an owner of a 2021 Ford Bronco and a 2020 Dodge Challenger Hellcat. I make videos on my ownership experience, on car reviews, and random videos like these where I talk about car news. So if this is your first time stopping by, I would really appreciate you subscribing to the channel, and when you're done watching this video, go and check out all of the other videos I have. But anyways, let's get to today's video. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the looks. Now, looks are subjective, that's obvious, but I wanted to point out some things that I noticed on the design cues of the Silverado versus the F-150 Lightning versus the Rivian. And the funny thing is, they all have that front giant light bar that goes from edge to edge on the front of the vehicle. I'm not sure if they coordinated that aspect or if it just was a big coincidence that they all have a light bar, and I think it looks pretty good. Now, I kind of wish Silverado did something a little bit different, but at least in the back, the Silverado is different from the F-150 Lightning and the Rivian. One design aspect that I thought was interesting on the Silverado is behind the passenger compartment, you have this sloping kind of roofline, similar to what you would find in like the mid-2000s Cadillac Escalade truck or the Chevy Avalanche. It's something interesting because they're bringing it back to these vehicles, and I don't think it's for aerodynamics. I think it's just a styling choice. But overall, without really seeing a car in person to know if you really like or dislike a design, I think it's a pretty good looking truck and on par with its competitors. Cybertruck excluded. Okay, now that we've addressed the looks and the design aspect, let's talk about some of the similarities. First and foremost, I want to talk about the purchase price. Now, believe it or not, these vehicles are actually very similar in purchase price. They both start at just under $40,000. They're essentially identical, give or take like 70 bucks. And for $40,000, you get pretty much the bare bones truck. Now, between you and me, we're probably never going to see these $40,000 trucks sitting on dealer lots. The dealerships just aren't going to order them. People just aren't going to buy them. Unfortunately, it's really just a marketing gimmick for these manufacturers to show that they have a relatively affordable truck, when in reality, probably the cheapest one you'll find is going to be above $50,000. And when you factor in destination and taxes, you're probably paying at least $45,000 anyway. So like I said, it's just a way for them to show that they have a sub $40,000 truck, even though in reality they don't. Now, going off the purchase price, there is a small difference because the highest spec F-150 actually costs $90,000, which is an insane amount of money, but then again, a Ram TRX pretty much is the same price. The difference is the Silverado is actually about $15,000 more expensive. The top of the line first edition Silverado is going to be selling for $105,000. So although they're similar in starting price, they are a little bit different in ending price. Now currently the Silverado is only released with two trim options. The first is the $105,000 first edition, and the second is the work truck that starts at 40 grand. It's hard to know exactly where all of the different price points will fall because the F-150 has many more trim levels in between their highest and lowest range. The next similarity I wanted to talk about is the fact that both of them come with two electric motors, one in the front and one in the back, very similar to what you see in a lot of other electric powertrains. And going off of that, the 0 to 60 times are almost identical between the two, on paper that is. The F-150 Lightning can do it in 4.4 seconds, and the Silverado is promised to do under 4.5 seconds. Also, they all share independent front and rear suspension. Furthermore, both trucks can actually charge your home or provide power like a generator to your house, so that you can power appliances, charge tools, and the Silverado EV can even charge another electric car. Now, I'm going to talk about range in just a minute here, but I think it's kind of ridiculous to charge another electric car when your truck itself can't do over like 500 miles of range. But it is kind of a gimmick that they can show off, and sometimes it could be useful to have your car as a generator, although the F-150 Lightning is not the only F-150 that has that option, but I believe this will be the very first Silverado that comes with that feature. The last similarity I wanted to talk about, aside from the fact of them being both trucks, is both of them come with a pretty semi-autonomous self-driving system. Ford has its patented Blue Cruise system, and Chevy has its Super Cruise system, and from my understanding, both of them work really well on specifically designated streets and highways, but it's just a nice add-on feature that you can add onto your F-150 or your Chevy Silverado, and you don't have to sacrifice one car or another if you want to have that type of feature. Alright, now let's get into the juicy stuff and talk about the major differences between the F-150 Lightning and the Chevy Silverado EV. The first one I wanted to point out is part of the reason why F-150 Lightning, which was released last May, is already starting to potentially hit production this spring, is because what Ford did was essentially take the existing F-150 platform body-on-frame truck and remove the internal combustion engine, put in an electric motor, and put in the batteries. It's not an entirely new platform, and by doing this, they're able to hit the market a lot quicker because they already have the existing platform. Now, GM did it a little bit differently. Their platform is actually entirely different. The Silverado EV doesn't really share any components with the outgoing Silverado. In fact, it shares almost the identical platform for the new Hummer EV. And this new skateboard-style electric platform that GM is using is called the Ultium platform. Now, Ultium does sound like an Avengers supervillain, but it is actually the name of their electric platform. And they're going to use this as a base for a lot of different SUVs and cars over the next 10 years. Now, I imagine Ford is actually going to do the same thing with their next generation F-150 Lightning, but in order to hit the market a little bit quicker, they're going with the more simple approach. Now next, I want to talk about payload, because those are two major differences between the vehicles. And payload is a very important feature if you're planning on owning a truck, because part of the reason of owning a truck is to be able to throw stuff in it and drive it around. Stuff that you can't necessarily throw inside of an SUV or a coupe. This is where the F-150 actually shines. The Silverado EV has a payload between 1,200 and 1,300 pounds depending on what trim level you get. That's actually on the lower end of pickup trucks. Whereas the F-150 Lightning actually has a standard payload of a regular pickup truck between 1,800 and 2,000 pounds, depending on which battery size you choose. That actually may be a very big contributing factor to why you choose an F-150 Lightning, because if you plan to haul a lot of stuff inside of your bed or inside the vehicle, the F-150 Lightning is likely going to do a little bit better because it has a higher payload capacity. Now, an asterisk to what I'm saying right now is these are all pre-production figures, so we don't really know exactly how much each one can do and how they came up with those figures, but we're looking at the spec sheet and that's the best I can do with the numbers I have. Speaking of payload, towing capacity may arguably be an even bigger deal when you're purchasing a truck. Now this is where they're somewhat similar but still a little bit different, and surprisingly, even though its payload capacity is lower, the Chevy Silverado EV has a higher towing capacity. At the base entry-level work truck, you have a towing capacity of 8,000 pounds, And if you choose the higher end model, you have a towing capacity of 10,000 pounds. To contrast that, the F-150 Lightning with its smaller battery has a towing capacity of 7,700 pounds, so 300 pounds less than the Silverado EV, but its larger battery matches the Silverado EV at 10,000 pounds. The one asterisk to that is GM actually said there will be a Silverado EV that can tow 20,000 pounds. That would be double the F-150 Lightning, and even though they didn't provide any details on how they're going to get there, what kind of trim level it's going to be, or how they're even going to manage to do it, that is something that they teased in today's big reveal. And for that reason, I put it in the category of differences, because if they can indeed tow 20,000 pounds, that would kind of be a game changer, especially for a non-heavy duty truck. Now we have to come to the big difference between the two, which is range. According to GM, the two trims that have been currently announced, which is the work truck and the first edition, both of them have a range of 400 miles on a single charge. That is actually a pretty impressive figure if they are truly able to reach those numbers. To contrast that, the F-150 Lightning is actually a lot weaker. The smallest battery on the Lightning can do 230 miles, and the upgraded can do 300 miles, which is still 100 miles less than the base work truck version of the Silverado EV. So if range anxiety is a big deciding factor, the Silverado EV takes the trophy between the two vehicles. Now let's talk about horsepower and torque. This is also where the Silverado EV on paper takes the lead. The base truck version of the Silverado EV that starts at around $40,000 has 510 horsepower and 615 pound-feet of torque. At the same time, the base F-150 Lightning has 420 horsepower and 775 pound-feet of torque. Now those two are kind of comparable because the lower horsepower on the F-150 Lightning is compensated by the higher torque, but the difference really lies in the higher end models. The first edition Silverado EV boasts 664 horsepower and 780 pound-feet of torque, whereas the larger battery pack F-150 can only do 565 horsepower, but the same amount of torque at 775. So when you're looking at the highest trim levels of both vehicles, the Silverado EV actually beats the F-150 Lightning when it comes to horsepower and torque. Next, I want to talk about the length of the bed. Now this is where it gets interesting and kind of confusing when it comes to the Silverado EV. Now both vehicles are actually only offered in one type of cab configuration, and therefore the bed length is exactly the same regardless of what trim level you choose. The Silverado comes with a 5-foot 11-inch bed, but you're able to actually expand that up to 9 feet if you fold down the seats on the inside. But if you use the multi-purpose tailgate and flip it up on its edge, you can actually get up to 10 feet 10 inches of bed length. That is a pretty significant size, of which the F-150 cannot match. The F-150 only has one option, and that is 5 feet 7 inches of bed length, which is a pretty standard size, but doesn't have the option to configure it however you like. Furthermore, the Silverado EV has a 60-40 split in the back where you can still have a seat open and seating a passenger while you have maybe a long piece of 2x4 that you have to put down the other seats for. That is a really unique proposition from the Silverado, but the one thing that confuses me is that its payload is only 12 to 1,300 pounds. I mean, if you have such functionality to be able to haul something that's 10 feet 10 inches long, you would hope that its payload would match the length of that object. And unfortunately, I don't think you'll find very many uses of that feature since your payload is limited to that amount. But it is still a very useful feature to have if you're moving couches or refrigerators, and for that reason, I think the Silverado takes the cake between the two. Now I want to talk about the interior, and looks are subjective, so I'm not going to talk about design or styling very much, but the Silverado has a larger infotainment screen. The Silverado's is a 17-inch massive LCD display versus the Ford's 15-inch vertical style display. The other thing to point out is the Silverado, similar to the Hummer EV, has 4-wheel steering. Now that is a very useful feature to have to make your truck feel more car-like and easier to drive and usable. There is no mention of whether the Silverado EV will have the crab walk like the Hummer EV. That may just be a trademark of the Hummer, but it is still an extra feature that makes driving a truck a lot easier and something the F-150 lacks. The other small difference to point out is the F-150 Lightning has a push-button start type system where you have to actually sit in the car and push a button to turn it on, whereas the Silverado EV kind of turns on as soon as you sit down and buckle up. So more similar to a Tesla style startup versus a conventional car with the F-150 Lightning. Now another difference that I wanted to point out that may influence your decision between the two, the Silverado EV has a faster fast charging system that can get you up to 100 miles in 10 minutes of charge. The F-150 Lightning is about half that speed. So if fast charging is your thing, then maybe the Silverado EV is a better choice. Then again, it is difficult to find functional fast chargers throughout the country's network. So it may be a toss-up between the two vehicles because you're more than likely going to just charge it at home. Now, the last difference I wanted to point out is the delivery date. Like I mentioned earlier, the F-150 Lightning is expected to start deliveries in the spring and summer of this year, whereas the earliest Silverado EVs will come out in fall of 2023 as a 2024 model year, but it is expected that the majority of vehicles and the lower trim levels will probably be delivered in the beginning of 2024. That potentially gives the F-150 Lightning about a year and a half to 2 years of an advantage over the Silverado. So if you're one of the people that need to have an electric pickup truck now, the F-150 Lightning may be the better choice. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's comparison video. I tried to outline some of the biggest similarities and differences between the two really cool electric pickup trucks. In my personal opinion, I don't know if I am ready to purchase an electric pickup truck because I feel like range and towing capacity are two things that are really going to influence my decision. Unfortunately, I don't expect either vehicles to be able to reach their targeted range limits of 300 or 400 miles when you're towing something between 5,000 to 10,000 pounds. There are a lot of videos out there of electric vehicles towing large things, and unfortunately range is cut from 50% to a third of what the actual range is for the vehicle. Now maybe these trucks are a little bit different, and I think it's too early to tell. You're gonna have to get them out on the roads and actually do these tests and experiments to figure out if they can maintain their range while also maintaining their towing capacity. But in reality, I just think the technology is too early to have pickup trucks with electric power. I think it makes total sense for commuter vehicles or sports cars because you're likely not driving them more than 500 miles a day. But if you're buying a pickup truck, you need something that's always there for you and very quick to get back on the road. And I just don't think electric power is the way to go with the way the technology is today. If we are able to get trucks that can get 1,000 miles on a single charge, well, I think that falls into the territory of maybe a usable daily driver as a truck. But when you're talking about towing with a 200-mile range, you're really not going to get very far if that's part of your job. And oftentimes, your truck is your number one tool, and so you have to make sure it lasts a very long time and can get you from point A to point B. But those are just my thoughts on the subject. Regardless, I think they are both very cool vehicles, and I think you can't go wrong with either one of them. The F-150 Lightning has its advantages, and the Silverado EV also has its own. It's a very tough choice between the two, and it really comes down to, do you need payload? Do you need towing capacity? Do you need horsepower? That's ultimately what you're going to have to decide. Well, thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure you hit that like button and follow me on all of the social media at Schwazy_. And as always, stay Schwazy, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day.